All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here. It's great to see you. We're going to talk about the DDEV container or Docker container architecture today, and we'll take a look at all the different ways that we build them, use them, what they are. I know that some of this is not everybody's familiar home territory, and some of you it is. So feel free to speak up with questions and answers. And if you have any rabbit holes to go down, we can go a little ways down the rabbit hole and return if we need to. So feel free to speak up. Feel free to ask in the chat or anything else. Pay attention. If I don't see you in the chat, somebody else pay attention and make sure that we get it brought up. So, well, we just had more participants than that, but now we don't. Let's just go around we'll go around the room, and we can just introduce yourself, say who you are, where you are in the world, what you work on, what your connection with DDEV is. And of course, Tyler 36 can post in the chat. I'm Randy Fay. I'm the project lead or lead maintainer of DDEV. Been working on it it must be coming up on 8 years now, and love to work with all of you on it. That's great. And so, Mark, go ahead.
Sure. Hey, everybody. I am Mark Lebrecq. I live on the west coast of Canada, and in Vancouver, BC. I work for a company called Affinity Bridge here. I've been working with Drupal for quite a while, and I have a particular interest in DevOps and how what I can do to make the rest of my team more productive. So DDEV has been a great tool for that since we've started using it about 2 or 3 years ago. So it's been great. But before this, it was really hard to get our team to agree on anything, like a set of tools. Everybody had their own set of tools, and nobody could. You'd lose days on development. Anyway, we don't need to go through that, but it's been great to have one single tool that we all like. Robert.
When people ask why shouldn't they just use their own tooling, their own Docker Compose, their own, run it on their own host. I always say, well, that is, if that's great. It worked for me for years, but certainly if you're in a team, you don't want your team lead to spend all your team lead's time trying to keep the junior devs development environment going, which is
100%.
certainly how it can be. So, Anish, go ahead if you can unmute. Or Cindy, go ahead. Or Benny, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Cindy. I've been working with Drupal for 2 years. I'm just here to learn more about DDEV.
We're glad you're here. What part of the world are you in?
Texas.
Okay, great to have you. Ofer.
Hi, I'm Ofer Shal from Boca Raton, Florida. I work at Phase 2, been in Drupal for many years, love DDEV since I found it, and learning a lot from Randy all the time. I have a project called Drupal Pod to help making contribution for Drupal easier, utilizing DDEV and Gitpod in the cloud, and looking forward to convert my own company in Phase 2 now from Doxel to DDEV.
That's exciting. As long as you've been complaining about that, that is exciting. That's great. It's Benny, go ahead. Oh, okay. Or feel free to post in the introduce yourself. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Robert?
Good morning. I'm Robert LeBlanc. I am a Drupal developer at ASU Enterprise Technology. I've been using Drupal for 7 years or so. The past, I don't know, 5 years maybe using DDEV. Yeah, Randy, you've helped me out in my setup in the past, and I'm very grateful. And I don't know too much about Docker, so that's why I'm here.
We're glad to have you.
Thank you.
Stas?
Hello everyone, I'm Stas Zhuk. I am maintainer of DDEV. I'm from Ukraine, and I use DDEV for Laravel projects, and I really like DDEV because it combines everything from Docker, and it's always great to learn how it is built. And today it would be great to learn about the Docker itself.
Cool. Anish, you get it working? No? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm Anish. I'm from Kerala, India. So I was using Drupal for around 14 years. So I have recently stumbled on DDEV, and I'm actually here to learn more about it and maybe contribute also.
Great to have you. Great to have you. Titwan, is that how you say your name? Go ahead.
Hi, yeah, that's right. Nice to meet everyone. I'm Titouan, a technical director in a web agency in France, and we've been using DDEV for, I think, 2 years, and it saved us, I think, many hours in our local development. And we are also using DDEV as a preview environment to show the work to our clients, so on a remote server. So yeah, thanks for the tool.
Great to have you here. Anybody else? Did I miss anybody? We get everybody? Well, let's go ahead and get started. And as I said, feel free to speak up if you have questions, comments, improvements. And we're going to try to make the ideas simple. It might be too simple for some of you, but the first thing is that I think that the easiest way to think about Docker containers is to think of them as little computers, little isolated computers that are running in their own specialized environment. And so DDEV has, when you start a DDEV project, it starts 2 or 3 or more little computers that are set up just like servers might be set up, like you would probably have servers set up. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. And I'm going to just take a look at the docs here that show the architecture of a running project where we have containers. So in DDEV, when you start it up, usually you'll have a DDEV web server, and the DDEV web server really behaves mostly like how you would have a web server set up in a production environment. It's a computer running Nginx or Apache, and usually running PHP FPM, and that's where the web serving is done. And then typically in a production environment, you would have a separate computer that had a database server like MariaDB or MySQL or Postgres. And so DDEV starts up those 2 containers for each project. And there may be other ones like Solar Elasticsearch or PHPMyAdmin or whatever. And then typically in a real hosting environment, you would have a router, a reverse proxy router on the front of that to deliver to the correct server the traffic that it's getting. So on a real server, it will typically terminate your TLS or SSL or HTTPS. It'll terminate that and do everything that needs to be done on that end, and then deliver the traffic to the correct place. And that's actually exactly how DDEV works. So DDEV starts another little computer, but just one, not one for each project, called DDEV router, that does that delivering to the correct project based on the host name in the URL. So that's how that works. And our DDEV router, the standard one, is called Traffic, spelled a little funky, but it's called Traffic. So that's the architecture of a running system, and it mirrors what your production environment probably looks like. So that's what DDEV is starting up. Any questions or comments on that? I guess not, but feel free. Benny, glad to have you here. Sorry, the tech didn't work quite right, but glad to have you here. Sometimes I'm at war with Zoom too, and glad to have you using Shopware and learning. I'll always want to learn more about how Shopware works with DDEV and DDEV works with Shopware. So if you have friction, please mention it. Okay, so I wanted to go back then. Those are containers, little computers, but you've all heard of Docker images. And so we're going to take a look at how we build Docker images. An image, if you're from the software world, so you probably know about classes and objects. Or if you're a cook, you probably know about recipes and actual food, or meals. A Docker image is like a perfectly, like a complete recipe, or it's like a class in an object-oriented programming language. So a Docker image specifies how you would make a container when you instantiated one. So, and we have a way to build the image, but then we can start many containers from that image. So DDEV Web Server is, we have an image for it, but each container we create is built from that image. And we'll take a look in a minute at what that image looks like. Hang on just a second. Let's see if somebody looked like they were having trouble. Oh no, sorry. That's not what we need. I was wondering if somebody was having trouble getting into the somebody was having trouble getting in here. Okay, that's not the case. And let me get my outline here. So we've got images and we've got containers. Does that make sense? The image is a recipe, and the container is the meal. You can make many meals out of a recipe. So I'm going to take a look here at the images that DDEV has that it builds, and they're in the containers directory. It should be called the images directory, but it's been called containers for a long time. Most of us have a little confusion talking back and forth about image versus container. So if you have that problem, you're with me. And it's been an ambiguity since Docker started. People they don't always use the exact perfect technology, and that's okay. But DDEV has several. Can you see my screen okay? Is that all right? Okay. We're in the containers directory here, and DDEV has the DDEV DB server image, the old Nginx proxy router. Then it has an image that is the base PHP image, which is actually huge. It's actually the basis. You'll never run it explicitly because it's the DDEV web server is built on top of that. It's built from that. It actually is just a convenience for us because it changes. It doesn't change very often, but when it does change, it takes an hour to build it. And the DDEV web server that's built on top of it only takes 5 or 10 minutes. So it's convenient to have that way. The DDEV SSH agent is a unique thing that does all of the work for your, when you do a DDEV auth SSH, it does an SSH agent inside the Docker world. And we won't look at that today because it's off track. It's not something that people normally have to look at, but your questions are welcome anyway. And then the traffic router, and then of course the DDEV web server. And so each of these has a Docker file which says how you would build the image. And of course, the image is then what a container is built from or run from, would be a better way to talk about it. So if I open up the DDEV web server, I have piles of directories of files that are supposed to go in there, which we'll see how those work. But the key element is the Docker file. And the Docker file is the full recipe that says how everything gets built. You can have different targets inside here. So this actually builds several things on it. But in a Docker file, every statement is actually a layer. So Docker images are built on a file system that is built up from different layers as it goes, and each layer adds to the other ones, and they're basically all read-only. So each statement in a Docker file adds a new layer. The ENV ones are kind of fake layers, but they do actually end up being layers. But here's the first one that we actually add, and it actually makes a layer, and it takes the files from the directory called etc, this one here, takes all those files in there from etc and adds them to the root. So it doesn't add DDEV web server etc to the root. And that is a layer in the file system that is building up the image. Then we run a script to make a home directory there for the www data user. None of these are important to understand. What's important to understand is that each one is adding a layer as we're building the thing up, and that's how we build it. Tell me how I'm doing. Am I making any sense at all?
Yep. So far, so good for me.
Okay, thanks. It's as you know, we can all talk on and talk on and talk on and thank you, Cindy.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Where do I find this?
So that's a great question. Let's take a look. If we go to the DDEV repository, which is github.com DDEV, and we go to the containers directory, and we go to DDEV web server, and we are in the Docker file.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
So, yeah, so this is this is what we're looking at right now. And everybody can contribute to it and everything else. Maybe it would have made sense for me to look at the website instead of the IDE.
Hey, Randy, when we have this installed on our system, would this be sort of analogous, this folder, would it be analogous to the home/.ddev folder? Or is this actually a different structure?
Are you talking about the DDEV source code? Or
Oh yeah, I forget that this is a compiled language, so we don't actually have a sort of an analogous, right? So I'm just thinking of like when we have this installed on our system, is there a place that we can go to look at this stuff that's already installed on our system? But it sounds like no, it's compiled, so you need to go get the source code before you can see that. That makes sense.
That is correct. And of
Makes
course,
sense.
DDEV is a composite of many different languages and technologies. So right now, so the DDEV binary is a result of building the Go code for DDEV, which is under the PKG and CMD directories here. So like here and the CMD directories. And so all the Go code is in there, and that results in a compiled DDEV binary. But as you know, from sometimes the pain of starting DDEV after a new release has come out, it pulls many Docker images as well. And so the Docker image is like yet another language. But the Docker image you can think of as a compiled Docker file. And the Docker file is what we're looking at here. So if we look through, yeah, any other questions before we go forward? Questions here, if we get in over our head today, can be spun off into future training. It's always great to take a look and see what makes sense and what doesn't make sense and what we need to work on. So the Docker file goes through and continues to build just a piece at a time here. It installs, it installs the Symfony CLI. It does all of those kinds of things. And then it installs the convenience packages that all of you love to have inside the container. I should go off on a slight detour here and mention why the DDEV web server is so big. People complain about that from time to time because when you do upgrade DDEV to a new version, or when you install it for the first time, that first DDEV pull or the first DDEV start pulls a number of images. And if you don't have good internet, then you might as well go sit down and watch TV for an hour or something, or half an hour. With good internet, it's just a minute or two, but we don't all have always good internet or appropriate internet. I sometimes go to a local Starbucks, and for some reason they have limited their internet access. I think they don't want people sitting there using good internet all the time. And so it takes forever. So I have to make sure that I have any images that I want before I go there. So I know the pain. Anyway, the reason that it is so big is because it's intended for local development. If it were intended for serving websites, if it were focused around serving websites, it wouldn't have all of these things in it. But it's intended for you in local development. So that's why it has Git in it, and why it has ping in it, and why it has JQ built inside it, and why it has Netcat, and why it has Patch in there, and why it has Python. So, and why it has Sudo. Sudo is there for you so that you can do things inside the container, or Telnet for debugging, or zip and unzip, which aren't always on every system. So the DDEV web server is big for that reason. We're going to have a training session on trying to slim down images I think we have it scheduled, and we'll take a look at different techniques for doing that. Obviously, we can just remove things that we don't think we need. But we're gonna see it in that session. We're gonna see if we can slim down the DDEV web server just a little bit, or maybe a lot, probably not a lot. One of the key things in DDEV web server is this one right here, which is like 60 megabytes. But it means that people in different countries, different locales, have all the locales pre-built in that they would want to use. But not a lot of people use that. So we could do different things there. DDEV web server is based on the current stable Debian version, Debian 12 Bookworm. And that means that if you want to add packages to it, they need to be compatible with Debian 12. Debian is kind of the ultimate standard for the Linux world. Ubuntu is built from it. And so usually anything that can work will work on Debian 12. So any questions about that, about where we're at, or things that we just hit and didn't hit as well as we could?
Yeah. Randy, do you read me? No. Okay. Randy, while you're saying this, just quickly, would there be an easy way of just replacing this base container? I mean, if for any reason, whatever, I wanted, to switch to another distro or whatever, could I somehow replace it and leave anything else in place? Or
it's hard because all of this logic is built in, and the start, we have there's a start script that needs to have things in place to do it. It's much easier in DDEV to add a different container, to add an extra service that is the kind of thing that you want, than it is to swap out the base DDEV web server, because DDEV web server has the use of DDEV web server by DDEV has so many assumptions of what will be there and what will work in a particular way. We do actually have a directive that we don't make public that lets you actually change what image you use, but we don't even have it in the global or in the config.yaml anymore. We don't mention it because it is just a prescription for trouble because of all the things that I just said.
Okay, yeah.
I've tried to switch over to the Red Hat ecosystem sometimes, and it's a pain because not only is the package manager different, but often the names of the packages themselves are different. And so if you're trying to pull down the same images, it's just going to say, no, I don't have that. So it can be really challenging. Apache is a great example. It's called HTTPD, I think, in the Red Hat ecosystem, and it's called Apache 2 in the Debian ecosystem. So you need to basically roll your own DDEV at that point, I think, and it would just be really, I think, challenging.
It is much easier to add to DDEV than it is to replace parts.
Okay.
Somebody going to say something? Okay. All right. So all of these layers, we won't go into the full details, but all of these layers at the end get squashed into a single layer. So after we have done it all, they all get squashed into one layer. I'm looking for where that happens and not finding it, but in the end, it's almost all into one squashed layer. And that's why you see it take when you pull DDEV web server, you see it working hard on one layer instead of working hard on several layers at once when you pull it. We do have full documentation about how you build an image. So if we take a look at the developer section, the development section of the docs, you'll see release management and Docker images. And you'll see lots and lots of the details that we won't go into today. But it explains how we actually push the Docker images using GitHub Actions. It explains how you would push them to the hub.docker.com registry if you were doing it manually. So you've got these steps here to do it. So you have to set a couple of things up with Docker. You have to do a Docker buildx create. You go into the directory that you want, and then this is how you would push right here. You do a make push version. You can also build a local version. So if I went into, let me just go here. So it's set up with a make file. So if I do a make version equals, if I do a make version like that, it's going to make a version of this DDEV web server like that. And it does, the make file does the work for you, pulls down the images that it needs for the base, and then it starts chunking away on those actions that we had in the DDEV web server.
And these are all layers that you were speaking about earlier, right? Each one of these lines is a different layer.
That was just pulling, but now it's on the new ones. You can see it adding each of the layers. You can see it working away on those. So here's the big one, the apt-get install, and here's a curl on the mage run, et cetera, et cetera. So it's doing all those things, and eventually it will be done. It's 4 out of 34. Oh, I should mention that the one of the key great things that DDEV does for you is it builds and uses multi-architecture images. So you remember just a few years ago that ARM64 took the world by storm with the Mac M1 and the Apple Silicon architecture. And you'll remember that that was very, very painful because all of the world's Docker images were Intel based. And so it was very difficult to run those old Intel images on a Mac. And so Docker came up with a technique to have both ARM64 and AMD64, the two major architectures, have both of those stored basically under the same name. So you'd have two images stored under the same name. Let's just go out there and take a look at this. We'll go to the DDEV web server image. And if we go to tags here, here are some recent tags. And you see under this one tag, well, let's look at the v1.23.1 tag. Under this one tag, we have two different images. One is AMD 64 and the other is ARM 64. So all of the piece parts in the AMD 64 one are the Intel architecture, and all of the piece parts and the operating system essentially on the AMD 64 one, ARM 64 one, are the ARM 64 image. It's not Apple Silicon. This is Linux running ARM 64, which is what you would use to use native images on a Mac, which is the leading, well, until today is the leading ARM 64 world, although Windows and Microsoft has just announced an enormous number of upcoming ARM 64 laptops that are supposed to be fantastic and even faster than the Macs. So we'll see how that turns out. I sure would like to try one. So when we build in DDEV, either using the GitHub Actions workflow or using the manual technique, we are building both styles, and you can actually see that. I guess you can't see that very well here. Oh, it's because I'm building locally. If I were pushing, it would be building both images at the same time, both tags at the same time, the AMD64 and the ARM64, and it would be running them, and they're interspersed. The output is not that great. But any questions about AMD64 and ARM64 images that we use on the different machines? It's a fundamental thing where DDEV, one of the reasons for DDEV's popularity is that some of the competing ecosystems weren't able to do that, and or maybe are just getting there now. It's about, what is it, 3 or 4 years since that came out, and DDEV had that as soon as Docker could support it. So it's something that we're very proud of, and it's a very good thing. Okay. One thing that we do, and let's just take a look at we're going to do a Docker images. Here, I'm going to do a DDEV list here. And you see that they're all stopped for some reason. And we're going to see what is running as a result. Oh, I must have changed. You see, when you've got internet, this doesn't take too long. I understand the pain when you don't have the good internet. I switched to test some things on Lima yesterday. And so I have Lima running on my machine instead of OrbStack. And so that's why it's having to grab the images right quick. Had a very strange Lima result with ownership inside a running container.
I've been using Colima for almost a year and a bit now, and I haven't had any issues with it. So it's been really nice for that.
That's great. That's great. We aren't really recommending Lima anymore because it's had some maintainership trouble, but it is certainly supported and documented, and it works. And if it works for you, then that's great. When you start a project, you see this building project images section right here. And that is a place where DDEV at start time, it doesn't do it every time. It doesn't have to do it every time. DDEV actually adds layers to the bottom of the image. So let's just take a look at that. In the .DDEV directory, and I would be better to open this up so you could see the perspective here. If I open this D10 project in the .DDEV directory, you probably know that there's a web build directory where you can put your own Docker files. That's essentially add your own layers to a particular project's DDEV web server. But every build actually has a hidden directory, .webImageBuild, where DDEV combines the particular extra layers that are for your machine. And they go in right here they get concatenated here, and then they're built. So when you see when we saw a minute ago, building project images, it is actually where it is doing this work right here, adding these layers to your DDEV web server. And so the reason that you can DDEV SSH and you can have your own user in there, which is a really nice feature, instead of finding yourself in there as root or whatever. The reason you can do that is because of this section right here, is that it figures out what your username and UID and group ID are on the host, and it installs that user inside the container for this, inside the image for this particular item. And then there's a composer self-update in there so that people get a new composer on a new project. And then there's a couple of cleanup things on the username, the home username. And in this case, we have Corpac enabled. So it runs Corpac enable and does a fix in case somebody has mucked with the PHP packages. It does a fix there. So these layers are just the generic layers that get added to a particular project to make it so that that project has an image like your own. But these only get executed when they change. So if you do a DDEV start on a new project, you'll see a few dots here, not very many. But if you then, you will then see almost none until you change something. So if you don't do a web image extra packages, then it won't do more. But if I do go in and, for example, in the config.yaml, if I say web image extra packages, and I say PHP 8.3-GMP, for example, then if I do a DDEV start, then it's going to have to go get that and build that. And now we will find that that has been added to our magic little concatenated Docker file. So you see it working away here at building those images, because there was a little bit to be done there. And actually, if I do a DDEV debug refresh, then we can see that happening as it actually does it. So it's having to do an apt update, and then it's doing an apt install on the new item. And those things that we're seeing with the DDEV debug refresh are the new, so our .web image build here, our .web image build got changed to translate that web image extra packages into an apt command, and inserted that. And if I were to fiddle with the Docker file, which I would be better to do right here, if I fiddle with the Docker file, let's say I change the Docker file to Docker file from dockerfile.example to Docker file, that will add an npm install and a little bit of information here with the build date. So if I do a DDEV start now, then it will add that to our little collection of customizations for this particular one. So we'll see that those are now here. So it says where it came from and what it's going to do. And it's going to do this npm install of the forever tool, and it will add a build date to it. Now, if we, after this comes up, if we go inside, we will find that the build date was added there, and that build date is in the image. And as a result, it's in the container, but it was added in the image. It will not be updated until we do anything else there. So we have a basic Docker image, which is built of many layers, which get smashed into one, and then get pushed up to the hub.docker.com registry, and then we add layers to those to personalize it for your project at start time, using those techniques that I just showed, the web image extra packages, for example, and the Docker file. So we add those layers to it. We can do the same thing with DDEV DB server. All the same facilities are there. But people don't often do that. Sometimes we do it. It's an easy way to add sudo, which isn't in there by default, for example. But those layers, adding those layers is really powerful, and that's at build time. So it's, if you add a whole bunch into a Docker file, that does not have to be re-executed on every DDEV start. So it's really efficient that way. So I have blabbed a lot, and we only have a few minutes left. I imagine you have some questions or comments or thoughts.
I want to say that if you build Docker images a lot, then it is stored in your cache, and you have to clear it from time to time.
That's a good point. There's both the Docker cache, and there's also the Docker images. Like I have, well, maybe I don't have so many here. If I say Docker images, I have quite a few, even though I'm on Lima. Yes, I have used this before. I have quite a few here. You probably have more. You'll see that we have some none images, which Stas is going to remove some. Those are images that were like we had this one built, for example, and then we rebuilt it with something new, and the other one got left behind, and that's a none image that got blown away. Actually, these 3 none images are a result of what I just did. Those are the things that I just did. I did an original DDEV start with one configuration. Then I went and added that PHP GMP. Then I went and added that Docker file. And so the older ones got abandoned. And there's what is the Docker cache? Docker, what is the command to destroy that cache? Remember what it is. Anyway, you probably don't have to care about this, but I think it's Docker system prune. And
says Docker builder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that will that is something that you do want to clean up from time to time. We don't have much trouble with that. I usually get rid of my images periodically, so I'll do a Docker RMI. I'll do a Docker rm-f $docker ps-aq to get rid of all of the containers that are running, and then I'll do a Docker RMI -F $Docker images -Q to get rid of all my Docker images, which will then just be downloaded. But I do that periodically because I'm always working on different varieties and that kind of thing.
When I used to maintain my own Docker system and Docker builds and all that, and I used to have to do this quite frequently. Since I've moved over to DDEV, I've never had to do this, I don't think, once. So I don't know if there's a level of the abstraction there that we don't need to worry about it, but it just seems to not be an issue anymore, which is great.
Yeah, I think we don't have much trouble. Now, you are probably using, if you do a Docker images, you probably see lots and lots of stuff there, and you may want to kill it off at some point because it's using disk space, but it doesn't cause trouble. And I can only remember one time that we were chasing a problem that we thought was the Docker build cache. And we did add a clearing of the Docker build cache to one of our test environments, but I'm not sure whether we were on the right track at that time either. So. You know, Robert says, when does the build take place? So the first build takes place when we push it up to Docker Hub. So that's the first place where almost everything happens. And then at DDEV start, those extra layers are added. I'll switch over here. And at DDEV start, there are a few extra small layers that are added, but these are only added when this file changes. And this file only changes when you change a .ddev web build Docker file, or when you change a web image extra packages. So you can do a DDEV start from now till the next version of DDEV, and it won't do that build again. So it's per project. It's per project, and it's the first DDEV start which has a change in one of those is when that part of the build happens. Does that make sense, Robert?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right, I think we all have it. Thanks so much, Mark, for coming. And I'm going to hang around a little while. We can continue talking if you have other questions. Happy to talk. I know this is a big subject, and I hope that gives you a start. Like we said, there is good documentation on how this works from a contributor level in the developer docs, but it can always be improved, and your contributions to those docs are always welcome. But we'll just keep talking here as long as you want to talk. If you have anything about any DDEV subject, we can talk about that. Or if you want to talk about images and containers and Docker architecture, we can talk about that as well. I'm going to stop the recording, but we can